So here we are at the pop-up museum for Martin Luther King. I'm going to rotate this here. Hopefully that doesn't want me to do that. So this is set up by the 62nd as part of their Black History Month and Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, which is today. But as we walk in, you can see that there have lots of pictures and silhouettes and quotes of people who have had significant impacts to the civil rights movement. Now, I'm not going to be able to take the time to read all these, so I'll try to pause long enough on each one. But things like this are important because it's only here for a few days. So if you're in the area, do come take a look at this museum. Now, pop-up museums are not typically very large, but they usually are rather impactful. This one in particular, speaking to the civil rights movement. And as I was talking with some gentlemen beforehand, civil rights is not limited to the African American experience, but there's a lot of diversity in America that has had to fight for their civil rights. What you can see here is the start of the tour, and this is the team that's responsible for that. So if you get a chance, be sure to thank them, especially if you're from the area. Now, this is probably one of my favorite things in the exhibit outside of the Martin Luther King and some other stuff I'll show you later. It's Executive Order 9981. It's the desegregation of the military. As you can see, this happened shortly after World War II. Now, this is an interesting one. The attorneys of the civil rights movement, my favorite up there, if anybody can guess, is Thurgood Marshall. Now, you notice I did a post about him a little while ago as the first black Supreme Court justice. And what's interesting, if you didn't know this about American history, the Interracial Marriage Club, for a long time in American history, various ethnic groups were legally not allowed, to marry anyone outside of their own ethnicity. Particularly, this was focused on blacks and whites and interracial marriages that way, but it pertained to everybody. As you saw there, it was John Lewis, who recently passed this past year. The Freedom Riders. There's a lot to talk about here, and by all means, when I post the video to YouTube and Facebook, please go back through and pause and take a look at them. This is probably one of the more interesting and significant moments in Olympic history, the Black Power salute by the two Olympians, whose names elude me at this time. Ruby Bridges, arguably the most courageous little girl that you could ever imagine, because the prejudice that she faced just to go to school was kind of incredible. Now in here, they have a huge wall of individuals who have been significant contributors to the civil rights movement. I apologize for my shadow being in and out. Now, if you want to come visit this museum, you do need to follow the procedures of a visitor to McCord Field. That can easily be discovered at the links I've posted earlier about this. It's pretty easy to get on the installation. It's not terribly hard, but do follow those rules. And this museum runs until the 22nd of January, at which time it's going to be packed up and moved somewhere else or waited till next year. So again, these are all leaders who've had some sort of influence, impact onto the civil rights movement. And if you look back through my posts, you can actually see the office of Dr. King when I visited the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. The more interesting thing there is that when you look through those photos, you'll see a podium that all the pastors of that church have preached from. And that podium is arguably as old as the church. Some of these photos are documenting the terrible things that have happened to people of color in the United States. So as we were walking through this, we're getting into now more the Black Panther movement, Malcolm X movement. Malcolm X, if you don't know, you should. Arguably was one of the most powerful speakers outside of Dr. King during the Civil Rights Movement, who was also assassinated. And that's how fearful some people were of the Civil Rights Movement, that it was going to give power to the black community and cause them to suffer for it, which is incredibly not true. It just comes from a very naive point of view. The 1963 March on Washington. This is the very famous now "I Have a Dream" speech. And you can see here what their demands were. What's interesting, when you start looking at the causes and the root of the Civil Rights Movement, you realize that it wasn't anything unreasonable. And per the Constitution, it wasn't anything they should have been ever denied. Now, this isn't a very long video, and this isn't a very huge museum, but if you take your time and read everything, it should take you about 45 minutes to an hour. Now, what's interesting is that when you talk about the Selma to Montgomery March here, I actually posted a video of when I was visiting Selma area, driving over that bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. As you can see right here, they are walking over the bridge there. And what's interesting is that they actually took several days in this walk. You can see the amount of people right here. This was a huge number of people that were walking to Montgomery to walk onto the Capitol. If you look down here, you can see a photo of them getting down there. It is a fact I almost often wondered what Dr. King would have accomplished had he not been cut down by an assassin's bullet. But this is the small exhibit for Dr. King. And as I said, please go back and look at the photos that I took at the church. But probably one of the more interesting things is the Rosa Parks sit-in that led to the Montgomery bus boycott. Now, what a lot of white leaders in Montgomery didn't account for is how much of a significant population the black community made up to the buses. So when they boycotted the buses, it was a significant impact to the economy of the bus system and nearly shut it down. The Little Rock Nine. Again, these people weren't asking for anything that wasn't inherently already given to many, many white people in America. Brown versus the Board of Education. And right here you can see Thurgood Marshall's name as one of the lawyers for the NAACP. And this is the case that makes me like Thurgood Marshall so much. His simple request was that they be allowed to have the same rights as any white person. And this ought to show you just how bad it is, or how bad it was at some times. So as I said, this isn't a terribly large exhibit, but it's incredibly impactful because you can see here how the laws have changed, and in rapid succession. In less than 10 years, you have 4 different rights written into law. But here it is in its entirety. It's not huge, but it's very impactful. I want to thank everyone. I know this is a short video, but I want to thank you for coming and joining me on this. And hopefully you'll stay tuned for more pictures and videos as I expand the Wandering Historian. Thank you for watching, thank you for coming, and as always, keep wandering.